It's Patrick Hutzel from Intensive Care at Home, where we provide tailor-made solutions for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies and otherwise medically complex patients by improving their quality of life, and where we also provide tailor-made solutions to hospitals and intensive care units to save money and resources whilst providing quality care. In last week's blog, I shared when can a tracheostomy be removed. You can check out last week's episode by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's blog, I want to answer another frequently asked question that we get from our clients and also from hospitals and intensive care units. The question this week is, when is the right time to leave intensive care and use intensive care at home? This is a great question, and thank you to all of you who have been asking. First off, a long-held belief, an outdated paradigm by intensive care doctors and intensive care nurses, as well as patients and families, has been that there are only two ways to leave intensive care. And that is, number one, patients recover and go to a hospital ward, and number two, patients don't recover and actually die. Thankfully, a new concept, proven third option has been created, which is intensive care at home. Therefore, the paradigm has been changed, and long-term intensive care patients can be safely looked after at home and leave intensive care. Given that there are many grey areas in intensive care, and given that there is often a fine line between keeping patients alive on life support or letting them die by withholding or withdrawing life support, such as mechanical ventilation with tracheostomy, many more patients in intensive care do survive if the right resources are being used to do so. Increased life expectancy, as well as intensive care units getting better at saving lives, increases the massive pressure on intensive care beds and also increases the pressure on intensive care doctors and intensive care nurses. This often leaves medically stable but still medically complex patients in intensive care for longer than anticipated and for longer than hospital budgets allow. By medically stable, I mean that patients need to be off inotropes or vasopressors and they need to be hemodynamically stable. Therefore, many medically stable on mechanical ventilation with tracheostomy, those patients can leave intensive care and go home with intensive care at home services. Bringing intensive care nurses into the home with our intensive care at home service is the real innovation for patients, their families, and for intensive care units. This is, of course, a much more patient and family-friendly option compared to a long-term stay in ICU or in long-term acute care, which is mainly for our US audience, because LTACs or long-term acute care facilities only exist in the US. So, going home with intensive care at home has numerous advantages, such as improve the quality of life or quality of end of life for patients and their families. It's cutting the cost of an in-demand intensive care bed by more than 50%. It provides a patient and a family-friendly experience. It frees up the in-demand intensive care beds that can be used for other critically ill patients. It's bringing families back together in a holistic home care environment rather than spending day and night in intensive care. By getting patients out of intensive care and by taking them home with our service intensive care at home, we help avoiding family breakups and we help maintain financial stability for families due to their ability to go back to work rather than spending day and night in intensive care. Also, weaning off ventilation with tracheostomy is so much easier and much more patient, family friendly in a home care environment. Also, intensive care at home minimizes infection risk due to no exposure to sometimes deadly hospital bugs in intensive care. Also, with technology such as apps being readily available, shorter communication channels are making it effortless to communicate, monitor, and manage long-term intensive care patients at home with intensive care at home and our ICU nurses. our ICU nurses can communicate with other senior doctors and nurses in real time to manage medically complex and life support dependent patients at home. The list of advantages is incomplete, however, you get the picture. In order to ease the pressure to both hospitals' intensive care units, patients and their families, a new and innovative approach such as intensive care at home is required. Therefore, one answer to intensive care bed shortages is intensive care at home. It is literally a game changer. Intensive care at home in numerous cases reduces the total healthcare cost massively. Patients can be discharged from intensive care to home directly and get the treatment such as long-term ventilation, weaning at home, and sometimes palliative care at home, with the same quality of monitoring and treatment. Today, with the help of remote monitoring system and ICU control rooms, real-time monitoring of patients is possible by intensivists. You can also check out our case studies that give you more hands-on examples how we manage to keep patients at home with intensive care nurses instead of having them stay in intensive care. So go and look on our website for the case studies. Again, apps improve communication too. Orders and instructions can be given in real time. A patient can be seen via apps such as Skype, WhatsApp, Google Live, etc. As consumer lifestyle changes, expectations as well as education improves treatment strategies, and they need to evolve quickly. Innovative technology within the intensive care at home healthcare space will enable this paradigm shift with real-time personalization, individualization, and patient as well as family empowerment. Many hospitals and intensive care units don't support collaboration with the intensive care at home environment yet, and some have already embraced it. Many intensive care units feel threatened by this model, whereas in reality, intensive care at home is a valuable partner for intensive care units in providing a genuine alternative to a long-term stay in intensive care. In fact, having a collaborative relationship between intensive care units and intensive care at home is creating win-win situations for hospitals, the patients and their families, as well as intensive care at home. Taking long-term, life support dependent and sometimes terminally ill patients home from ICU directly eases the pressure on the ICU beds, on emergency departments, therefore making room and creating resources to admit new critically ill patients back to intensive care. Intensive care units can prevent overcrowding and its associated perils such as hospital-acquired infections by partnering with home healthcare experts such as our intensive care at home service. Therefore, intensive care at home is making sure ICU beds are available for critically ill patients in the ICU. Our concept of intensive care at home also provides a faster recovery for the patients due to the patient and family-friendly environment. The expert continuum in the home is ensured, therefore eliminating and minimizing the risk for readmissions back to intensive care. We use exceptionally well-trained intensive care nursing staff to deliver on the intensive care at home experience, from providing patients with IV treatment when required to tracheostomy care, mechanical ventilation, BiPAP or CPAP ventilation, home TPN, seizure management and end-of-life or palliative care, to highly sophisticated and vital and heart monitoring. Intensive care at home ensures all of this can be done at home. Real live feedback using remote monitoring equipment, real-time data is fed constantly to medical specialists in hospitals to ensure round-the-clock expert care and supervision. And as you can imagine, we often develop very close relationships with our clients and their families, which can be used to provide feedback to hospitals to improve their services too. And then Last but not least, there's the financial benefits. Often intensive care units believe that intensive care at home is a financial threat and could challenge their revenue streams. However, this is certainly not the case. In fact, intensive care at home helps freeing up the most expensive and the most sought after bed in a hospital, the intensive care bed. Intensive care unit beds usually generate the highest revenue in the beginning, but usually less after time progresses. This puts massive pressure on the ICUs. Therefore, long-term intensive care patients are not only financial, but also a bed block risk for intensive care. Intensive care at home steps in at that point by providing the same level of care at home, in the comfort of a patient's home, while reducing the cost by 50% and freeing up the ICU bed. This partnership between hospitals and intensive care at home is the innovative solution needed to solve the massive shortage of ICU beds. If you want to find out how we can help you to get your loved one out of intensive care, including palliative care or long-term acute care, or if you find that you have insufficient support for your loved one at home on a ventilator or with other medically complex issues, if you want to know how to get funding for our service, please send me an email to patrick@intensivecareathome.com. That's Patrick, P-A-T-R-I-K, or call me on one of the numbers on the top of the website. Also, have a look at our career section. We are currently hiring intensive care and pediatric intensive care nurses for clients in Melbourne, Sunbury, and in South Gippsland and Victoria. We are an NDIS, TAC, and DVA approved community service provider in Australia. We have also been part of the Royal Melbourne Health Accelerator program for innovative healthcare companies last year. Thank you for tuning into this week's blog. This is Patrick Hutzel from Intensive Care at Home, and I'll see you again next week in another update.